First Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. 16:1. Then the word of the Lord came to Jehu son of Hanani against Baasha. 2. I lifted you up from the dust and made you leader of my people Israel. But you walked in the ways of Jeroboam and caused my people Israel to sin and to provoke me to anger by their sins. 3. So I am about to consume Baasha and his house, and I will make your house like that of Jeroboam son of Nebat. For dogs will eat those belonging to Baasha who die in the city, and the birds of the air will feed on those who die in the country. 5. As for the other events of Baasha's reign, what he did and his achievements, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Baasha rested with his fathers and was buried in Tirzah. And Elah his son succeeded him as king. 7. Moreover, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Jehu son of Hanani to Baasha and his house, because of all the evil he had done in the eyes of the Lord, provoking him to anger by the things he did, and becoming like the house of Jeroboam, and also because he destroyed it. The fact that one dynasty replaced another in rapid succession on the throne of Israel does not seem to be God's perfect plan for the nation. The Wycliffe Bible commentary states appropriately, Nadab, 910 to 909, the wicked son of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, came to the throne. It must be remembered that while some 8 dynasties were succeeding each other in northern Israel, to the south of Judah, but one dynasty, the Davidic house, held sway. The pulpit commentary observes correctly, Baasha owed his elevation to his own abilities or to his unscrupulous daring. The Fawcett's Bible Dictionary comments, though Baasha thus fulfilled the word of Jehovah by Ahijah, yet is not this, but his own bloody-minded ambition was his motive. He should be punished. Hos 1:4. His following Jeroboam's sins showed that his destruction of Jeroboam's house was not from zeal for God. The scripture's verdict over Baasha's reign is, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. The same formula is used to describe several of the kings of the northern kingdom. We read the same about Zimri, who assassinated Baasha and usurped the throne, about Omri and about Ahaziah. The Lord sent Baasha a prophetic warning by means of the prophet Jehu. This Jehu is not to be confused with the Jehu who would later become king over Israel. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, comments on Baasha's reign. God raises to leadership from the dust, as he sometimes does the poor. 1 Samuel 2 verse 8, Psalms 113 verse 7, CFPS 40:2, and Jeroboam, 1 Kings 14 verse 7, and later Hezekiah 2 Kings 20 verse 5. It is taken by some to refer to a divine, charismatic appointment. 6. Elah of Israel, 16:8-14. 8. In the 26th year of Asa king of Judah, Elah son of Baasha became king of Israel, and he reigned in Tirzah 2 years. 9. Zimri, one of his officials, who had command of half his chariots, plotted against him. Elah was in Tirzah at the time, getting drunk in the home of Arza, the man in charge of the palace at Tirzah. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. 10. Zimri came in, struck him down, and killed him in the 27th year of Asa king of Judah. Then he succeeded him as king. 11. As soon as he began to reign and was seated on the throne, he killed off Baasha's whole family. He did not spare a single male, whether relative or friend. 12. So Zimri destroyed the whole family of Baasha, in accordance with the word of the Lord spoken against Baasha through the prophet Jehu. 13. Because of all the sins Baasha and his son Elah had committed and had caused Israel to commit, so that they provoked the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger by their worthless idols. 14. As for the other events of Elah's reign, and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? The text states that Elah reigned for 2 years. This is according to the Hebrew way of reckoning. The Wycliffe Bible commentary observes, Elah's reign, 886 BC, 885 BC, a brief and unhappy one, lasted just 1 year and ended in a violent death. Zimri, one of the captains of Elah's own guard, conspired against him and slew him. The 41-year-long reign of Asa is used as a time measure for several of the kings of the northern kingdom. The fact that Elah was assassinated while he was drunk, among other features, does not speak well of his moral behavior. The pulpit commentary states, several points present themselves for notice here. 1. The example of Jeroboam has clearly had its full influence on the nation. The Lord's anointed is no longer held in reverence, as in the days of David, 1 Samuel 24 verses 6 and 10, 26:9, 16, 2 Samuel 1 verse 14, nor is it accounted a sin to grasp at the crown. 2. Zimri only does what Baasha had done before him. That prince was hoist with his own petard. 3. Elah would seem to have been a dissolute and pusillanimous prince. His place was clearly with his army at Gibbethon Ver. 15. Cf. Jos 8:12-4. And as clearly it was not in the house of one of his subjects, even the attendant of his palace. An Oriental monarch is precluded by etiquette from accepting the hospitality of his subjects, one Bible scholar, who further remarks that the low tastes which we here find Elah indulging had probably been formed before his father was exalted out of the dust, as probably they were inherited direct from his father. Anyhow, they led to his destruction. It is clear that Elah's want of character, like Nadab's, suggested the conspiracy of Zimri. 4. It is extremely probable, though not absolutely certain, as the above-mentioned scholar affirms, that Arza was one of the conspirators, and that the wretched prince had been decoyed to his house and made drunk, with a view to his murder there. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, comments on Zimri's regicide, the total extinction of the family, cf. 1525, was planned so as to leave neither male nor kinfolk, AV, that is, male relatives, as NIV, who would have to moral obligation to act in blood revenge, Goalim. As noted earlier, although this murderous act had been prophetically predicted, it does not mean that it was God's perfect will for the nation of Israel. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. 7. Zimri of Israel, 16:15-20. 15 in the 27th year of Asa king of Judah, Zimri reigned in Tirzah 7 days. The army was encamped near Gibbethon, a Philistine town. 16 When the Israelites in the camp heard that Zimri had plotted against the king and murdered him, they proclaimed Omri, the commander of the army, king over Israel that very day there in the camp. 17 Then Omri and all the Israelites with him withdrew from Gibbethon and laid siege to Tirzah. 18 When Zimri saw that the city was taken, he went into the citadel of the royal palace and set the palace on fire around him. So he died. 19 Because of the sins he had committed, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord and walking in the ways of Jeroboam and in the sin he had committed and had caused Israel to commit. 20 As for the other events of Zimri's reign and the rebellion he carried out, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Zimri's reign over the northern kingdom is the shortest of all in the biblical record, and it may be the shortest of any king who ever ruled on earth. The pulpit commentary comments on Zimri's murders. Zimri went a step farther than Baasha had gone. He was not content with extirpating the royal family, but put to death the partisans of the house, all who would be likely to sympathize with Elah or to resent his murder. The name Zimri, which probably means wild sheep or wild goat, became proverbial. When Jehu, who would later occupy the throne, encountered Queen Jezebel, we read, when Jezebel heard about it, she painted her eyes, arranged her hair, and looked out of a window. As Jehu entered the gate, she asked, "Have you come in peace, Zimri, you murderer of your master?" 128 Zimri became also the first king in the Bible who committed suicide. C. The House of Omri, 1621-2240. I. Omri of Israel, 16:21-28. 21 Then the people of Israel were split into two factions. Half supported Tibni son of Ginnith for king, and the other half supported Omri. 22 But Omri's followers proved stronger than those of Tibni son of Ginnith. So Tibni died and Omri became king. 23 in the 31st year of Asa king of Judah, Omri became king of Israel, and he reigned 12 years, 6 of them in Tirzah. 24 he bought the hill of Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents of silver and built a city on the hill, calling it Samaria after Shemer, the name of the former owner of the hill. 25 But Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord and sinned more than all those before him. 26 He walked in all the ways of Jeroboam son of Nebat and in his sin, which he had. 128 2 Kings 9 verses 30 and 31. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Caused Israel to commit, so that they provoked the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger by their worthless idols. 27 As for the other events of Omri's reign, what he did and the things he achieved, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? 28 Omri rested with his fathers and was buried in Samaria. And Ahab his son succeeded him as king. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, observes, civil war followed Zimri's death. Tibni received sufficient popular support to oppose Omri despite the latter's acceptance by the army. Tibni must have held out against Omri for 3 to 4 years, cf. Verses 15, 29, and have been counted as an official ruler of Israel, since the latter did not become king until 3 years after the death of Zimri. The text does not say that Tibni was ever actually made king. There is no evidence that this was a clash between popular democracy and a formally established dynasty, nor that the record of Tibni's death refers to his being divested of royal authority rather than his physical demise. Whether the friction between Tibni and Omri can be labeled a civil war is a difficult question to answer. We only read that popular opinion was divided as to who ought to occupy the throne after Zimri's death. The fact that the army supported Omri must have been a decisive feature. A king who has no army has no power to enforce his rule. David had been aware of this, which was the reason he kept on Joab as commander, although he wanted to rid himself several times of this unscrupulous general. On his deathbed, he ordered Solomon to deal with Joab and execute the capital punishment which he had been unable to carry out. The pulpit commentary observes, the only thing that is certain is that, the hereditary principle being overthrown, the crown appeared to be the legitimate prize of the strongest, and Tibni, who may have occupied a position of importance or have had, somehow, a considerable following, resolved that Omri should not wear it without a fierce contest. The Wycliffe Bible commentary states, Omri did not come into possession of the throne of Israel immediately, but rather was obliged to contend for it. According to Josephus, Tibni was slain by his opponents, but this meaning is not necessarily contained in the words, so Tibni died. It is to be taken that the latter met his death in the fierce engagements that followed the schism 5 years later. The Bible does, indeed, not explain how Tibni's life ended. The act for which Omri would be remembered in history was his purchase of the hill of Samaria and the building of a city which became the capital of the northern kingdom. Our text reads that Omri called the hill Samaria after Shemer, the name of the former owner of the hill. The International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, however, states Shemer may be an ancient clan name. The fact, however, that the mountain was called Shomerin when Omri bought it makes one doubt that the city of Samaria was named after Shemer. The passage is questionable. The real etymology of Samaria roots it in Watch Mountain. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, writes about Omri's exploits. Excavations at Samaria show that Omri was the first builder on the 100-meter high hill. This site was a good choice, for it was to withstand several sieges, cf 20:1-11, 2 KGS. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. 6:24-25, 18:9-10. Omri's plan could have been to gain A. A personal possession he could bequeath. B. An independent Canaanite center, cf 1632, Baal worship, Sea, a communications center west of the hill ridge and so more open to trade with Tyre and Sidon than Tirzah, which faced east, and D, an independent new capital for the northern kingdom as David had at Jerusalem to rally his supporters in the south. He outdid all his predecessors in wickedness, NEB. Apart from a passing reference to his other achievements, V, 27, described as the mighty, warlike, Acts, RSV, Heshud, AV. His major contributions to the history of Israel as one of its most distinguished ruler are outside the purpose of this history. These include the unification of the northern kingdom, peace with Judah, effective control over North Moab where he humbled and occupied the land of Medaba and built fortresses at Adaroth and Yahaz. According to the Moabite Mesha inscription of c. 830 BC, Omri's dynasty lasted more than 40 years. His strong government and administration earned recognition by the Assyrians, who for the next 1.5 centuries still referred to Israel as the house/dynasty of Omri. 2. Ahab of Israel, 16:29-34. 29 in the 38th year of Asa king of Judah, Ahab son of Omri became king of Israel, and he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. 30 Ahab son of Omri did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. 31 He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel daughter of Ethbal king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. 32 He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. 33 Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than did all the kings of Israel before him. 34 In Ahab's time, Hill of Bethel rebuilt Jericho. He laid its foundations at the cost of his firstborn son Abram, and he set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son Segub, in accordance with the word of the Lord spoken by Joshua son of Nun. The pulpit commentary introduces Ahab's reign with the following comment: with the accession of Ahab, a new main section of our history begins, the section which has its close in the destruction of the house of Omri by Jehu, as related in 2 Kings 10. And this reign is recorded at unusual length. In fact, it occupies nearly all the remaining portion of this volume, whereas the reigns of preceding kings have in several instances been dismissed in a few verses. It owes this distinction to the ministry of the great prophet Elijah by which it was marked, and, indeed, was profoundly influenced. But this ministry, it must be remembered, was necessitated by the critical circumstances of the time. It may be that every age thinks itself a crisis, but no one can fail to see that this was one of the veritable turning points of Jewish history. One of the real, decisive battles of the world, that between the Lord and Baal, was then fought out. No wonder that. Our historian felt constrained to chronicle at length the transactions of a reign so pregnant, both with good and evil for the people of the Lord and for the faith with which they had been put in trust. Indeed, the same guiding principle which led him to devote so many of 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. His pages to the reign of Solomon, when the theocratic kingdom was at its highest, impelled him to linger over the reign of Ahab when religion was at its lowest ebb. The secular historian, too often like the sundial which counts no hours save those serene, draws a veil over the time of his country's decadence, or touches its misfortunes with a light hand. It is only in the inspired records that we have an impartial register both of the glory and shame of a commonwealth. Ahab completely turned his back on the true worship of Yahweh and dedicated his whole religious life to Baal idolatry and all its consequences. His marriage to Jezebel played a very important role in this. The Wycliffe Bible commentary comments on Ahab's marriage to Jezebel and subsequent idolatry. This marriage was doubtless mainly a political maneuver, based on the ancient treaty of peace made between Israel and Zidon under the leadership of Solomon. And Ahab may have thought that he was partially justified in this union. However, the cruel, licentious worship of Baal so permeated the worship of Tyre and Sidon that its infiltration into Israel through Jezebel was inevitable. The term Baal, the Hebrew word for Lord and Master, was employed more or less indiscriminately for a number of national gods. The Baal of Tyre, however, was Melkarth, the Tyrians' chief god. Jezebel played the role of chief priestess of the Tyrian Baal. Melkarth was the kind of god that required the burning of innocent children as oblations upon his altar. One of the underlying reasons why Baal was worshipped was that he was believed to be lord of the land. To induce him to send rain upon the earth, fertility cult practices were engaged in and sacrifices were offered. Perhaps there was some excuse for Jezebel, who was born and reared as a heathen princess, to follow such a religion. But there was absolutely no justification for Ahab's letting his wife introduce this heinous religion into the life of Israel. Ahab went well beyond the sins of Jeroboam in making the Baal worship the official religion of the northern kingdom. When Jeroboam installed the altars at Dan and Bethel, he still referred to them as places where Yahweh was worshipped. His sin was, at least initially, that he disobeyed the revelation of God's will as to where he ought to be worshipped. Ahab completely moved away from the worship of Yahweh and replaced the God of Israel with the God of Sidon. This meant that he turned from the creator of the universe, from the God of Israel, to one of God's fallen angels, Satan. The chapter ends with the mention of the rebuilding of Jericho, the first Canaanite city that was captured when Israel began to conquest of the Promised Land. When that happened, we read, "At that time Joshua pronounced this solemn oath. Cursed before the Lord is the man who undertakes to rebuild the city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son will he lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest will he set up its gates." 129. Joshua's 500-year-old curse was fulfilled in the rebuilding of the wall of that city. Bible scholars disagree about the way this fulfillment occurred. Some believe that he lost his oldest boy through sickness as he began the reconstruction, and that, at the completion of the wall, his youngest son also died a natural death. Others interpret this to mean that the children were sacrificed and that their bodies were entombed in the wall. There is some archaeological evidence of the latter. In some cases, bones of little children have been found encapsulated in ancient city walls. 129 Josh, 626. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Halley's Bible Handbook states, "The ruins of Jericho show that it was inhabited continuously from pre-Abrahamic times to about 1400 B.C., with no signs of habitation from then to the 9th century B.C., time of Ahab. The ruins were very small. In this stratum, a large house was uncovered, which may have been the house of Heel. A jar with the remains of a child was found in the masonry of a gate, and 2 such jars in the walls of a house." Such archaeological finds indicate the horror of the kind of idolatry practiced during Ahab's reign. 3. Elijah and the prophets against Ahab, 17:1, 2240. A. God keeps Elijah safe, 17:1-16. 1. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." 2. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah. 3. Leave here, turn eastward and hide in the Koroth ravine, east of the Jordan. For you will drink from the brook, and I have ordered the ravens to feed you there. 5. So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Koroth ravine, east of the Jordan, and stayed there. 6. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. 7. Some time later the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. 8. Then the word of the Lord came to him. 9. Go at once to Zarephath of Sidon and stay there. I have commanded a widow in that place to supply you with food. 10. So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there, gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?" 11. As she was going to get it, he called, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." 12. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." 13 Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small cake of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son." 14 For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, "The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord gives rain on the land." 15 She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. 16 For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. James mentions that Elijah actually took the initiative by prayer that the Lord would send an extended drought to Israel in order to get the attention of Ahab and the people, in order to bring the nation back to God. We read, "Elijah was a man just like us." 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. Again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its crops. 130 Elijah's announcement to King Ahab was not only an act of faith, it was also heroic. It could have cost him his life. The king could easily have arrested him and condemned him to death. Ahab must have been taken aback, which prevented him from handling the matter at the spur of the moment, or he may not have believed the prophet. Elijah uses strong language, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve." Elijah emphasized that Ahab did not serve the God of Israel, although he was the king of Israel. He did not reign as king under God, which was his actual status. As the drought set in and the crops failed, famine took over in the land, and the whole nation began to suffer, Elijah himself included. But God made a special provision for his servant. Elijah is told to go east of the Jordan River and hide in a ravine. There would be a brook to provide him with water to drink, and a flock of birds would come and feed him twice a day with bread and meat. David would testify toward the end of his life, "I was young and now I am old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging bread." 131 But the brook did dry up also, and Elijah was told to go to Zarephath and stay there with a certain widow. God said to him, "I have commanded a widow in that place to supply you with food." Yet, as Elijah arrives at her place, it seems that she didn't know anything about the Lord's provision. She would find out, however. The Matthew Henry's commentary observes, the place he is sent to Zarephath or Sarepta, a city of Sidon, out of the borders of the land of Israel, v. 9. Our Savior takes notice of this as an early and ancient indication of the favor of God designed for the poor Gentiles in the fullness of time. Luke 4 verses 25 and 26. Many widows were in Israel in the days of Elias, and some, it is likely, that would have bidden him welcome to their houses. Yet he is sent to honor and bless with his presence a city of Sidon, a Gentile city. And so becomes, says another theologian, the first prophet of the Gentiles. Israel had corrupted themselves with the idolatries of the nations and become worse than they. Justly, therefore, is the casting off of them the riches of the world. Elijah was hated and driven out by his countrymen. Therefore, lo, he turns to the Gentiles, as the apostles were afterwards ordered to do. Acts 18 verse 6. But why to a city of Sidon? Perhaps because the worship of Baal, which was now the crying sin of Israel, came lately thence with Jezebel, who was a Sidonian, ch. 1631. Therefore thither he shall go, that thence may be fetched the destroyer of that idolatry. Even out of Sidon have I called my prophet, my reformer. Jezebel was Elijah's greatest enemy, yet, to show her the impotency of her malice, God will find a hiding place for him even in her country. Christ never went among the Gentiles except once into the coast of Sidon, Matt 15:21. Elijah met the widow as he approached the city, even before entering it. He finds her outside the city gate, gathering wood for a fire. He calls to her and asks her for a drink of water. As she goes to get it, he adds, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, comments on the encounter. Elijah was visiting enemy territory and showing the power of God in an area where Baal was worshipped, though ineffective through drought. He illustrates how a prophet can be. 130 James 5 verses 17 and 18, 131 Psalms 37 verse 25. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Accepted outside his own country. Luke 4 verses 25 to 26. Elijah challenges a seemingly poor woman to help as she gathered mere stubble or sticks, twigs, Hugh says, to respond to a stranger's request. But he was sent by God. His request for a bit of food, v. 11, evoked the reply that she had no ready food, for a cake of bread, v. 13, needed baking on charcoal, and she had nothing baked, RSV, rather than bread or sustenance, NV. Similarly, she had only a handful of barley flour, heb, meal, in a large pottery jar, cf. 1833, Judges 7 verse 16, and very little oil in a small portable flask, Sapahat, NV, RSV Cruz, NIV, and Resv jug, to prepare something to eat. The pulpit commentary comments on Elijah's request to the widow for a drink of water. It is clear that the water supply of Phoenicia had not entirely failed. The fresh streams of Lebanon would retain their life-giving power long after the scantier springs of Palestine had been dried up. In the woman's answer to Elijah, she uses the introductory words, as surely as, "The Lord your God lives, Yahweh Elohim." Considering the fact that she was not Jewish, that is a remarkable statement. It is true that she used the words, "your God," but although some Bible scholars put a good deal of emphasis on this, it does not exclude the possibility that she believed in God, at least as the creator. The terms would be very strange in the mouth of an idol worshiper. It is difficult for us to imagine the state of mind of a person who believes that she and her son will die of starvation after having finished the last supply of food in the house. Even if she had no personal faith in the God of Israel, the fact that someone, who was obviously a Jew, would ask her for food and a drink must have struck her as more than a mere coincidence. Sharing her bread and water with this stranger would merely mean that she and her son would die a few days sooner, so what difference would that make? Such thoughts of despair may have crossed her mind. In answer to that desperate condition, she hears what Elijah calls what the Lord. The God of Israel says, "The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord gives rain on the land." That divine promise must have made her believe that it was worth trying. In utterly desperate situations, one little thread of hope may be enough to cling to. Her faith was justified by the fact that the flour and the oil did not diminish. Every time, after she had taken what was needed to bake bread, the same amount reappeared in the jars. Corrie ten Boom recounts a similar miracle happening in the Nazi concentration camp where she found herself with her sister Betty. They had a bottle of liquid vitamins, which they distributed to the women in their barracks. Corrie testifies that the Lord replenished what was taken every day. The miracle was sufficient proof for the widow in Zarephath to know that Elijah was God's prophet. B. The raising of the widow's son, 17:17-24. 17 Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and finally stopped breathing. 18 She said to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. 19 Give me your son. Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. 20 Then he cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought tragedy also upon this widow I am staying with, by causing her son to die?" 21 Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." 22 The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. 23 Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room into the house. He gave him to his mother and said, "Look, your son is alive." 24 Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." Faith must be tested. The woman knew already that Elijah was a man of God by the fact that the food supply in her house kept on being replenished miraculously. Yet, it seems that this fact had not led her into a personal relationship with the God of Israel. Maybe Elijah's faith needed some testing also. The widow's son became ill and died. The cause of death is not mentioned, but it cannot have been starvation. Bible scholars have debated whether the boy had really died or had only lost consciousness. The Hebrew text reads literally, "There was no breath left in him." Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, observes, "The boy was certainly dead according to the mother, v. 18, the prophet, v. 20, and observers of the time interval before treatment." Although, among some primitive tribes, such as we worked with in Papua, Indonesia, people are considered dead when they lose consciousness, there is no reason to believe that such was the case among the Israelites or their neighbors. The mother took the death of her son to be a personal punishment for her sin. Whether this means that the birth of her son had been the result of an illegitimate relationship, or whether she just felt convicted by sins she had committed in her everyday life, cannot be determined. She believed that the death of her son was God's punishment for her. Actually, she blamed Elijah for her son's death, saying, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" In answer to her bitter accusations, Elijah asks the mother to give him her son's body, which he takes to his bedroom. In praying for the boy, Elijah used the same word, to slay, that the mother had used, but applying it to what God had done. But his following act indicates that he did not believe that the boy's death was God's final word. In praying for the boy, he stretched himself out upon the dead boy's body as if to share his own life with the boy. He had to do this 3 times before anything happened. Persistence in prayer is a necessity. In answer to this prayer, the boy's life came back to him. The Hebrew text reads literally, "And the soul of the child returned to him again, and he revived." The Hebrew word used is chaya, which simply means to live. The first time the verb is used in Scripture is when Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image. 132 Genesis 5 verse 3. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. When the boy had come back to life, Elijah took him in his arms and brought him back to his mother. This suggests that the boy must have been rather young, probably not yet a teenager. For the mother, this resurrection of her dead child was the final proof that not only Elijah was a true servant of the God of Israel, but also that the God of Israel was the true God. She already had had some proof of this in the replenishing of her daily food supplies, but the miracle of life was greater than the miracle of sustenance. See Confrontation and Vindication, 18:1-46. One after a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, "Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land." So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria. 3 and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of his palace. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. For while Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. 5 Ahab had said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive so we will not have to kill any of our animals." 6 So they divided the land they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in another. 7 As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" 8 Yes, he replied. "Go tell your master, Elijah is here." 9 What have I done wrong? Asked Obadiah, that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death? 10 As surely as the Lord your God lives, There is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And whenever a nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. 11. But now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here. 12. I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshipped the Lord since my youth. 13. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. 14. And now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here. He will kill me. 15. Elijah said, As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself. To Ahab today. 16. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. 17. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, Is that you, you troubler of Israel? 18. I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. 19. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel. And 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. 20. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. 21. Elijah went before the people and said, How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. But the people said nothing. 22. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. 23. Get 2 bulls for us. Let them choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. 24. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. Then all the people said, What you say is good. 25. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, Choose one of the bulls and prepare it first. Since there are so many of you, call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. 26. So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. O Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar they had made. 27. At noon Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder, he said. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. 28. So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. 29. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response, no one answered, no one paid attention. 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, Come here to me. They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which was in ruins. 31. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, Your name shall be Israel. 32. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. 33. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, Fill 4 large jars with water, and pour it on the offering and on the wood. 34. Do it again, he said, and they did it again. Do it a 3rd time, he ordered, and they did it the 3rd time. 35. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. 36. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. 37. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. 38. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. 39. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." 40. Then Elijah commanded them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away." They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there. 41. And Elijah said to Ahab, "Go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain." 42. So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. 43. Go and look toward the sea, he told his servant. And he went up and looked. "There is nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." 44. The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." 45. Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds, the wind rose, a heavy rain came on. And Ahab rode off to Jezreel. 46. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah, and, tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. This is one of the great chapters in the book of 1 Kings. It may be one of the most important ones in all of the Old Testament. Elijah had not predicted how long the drought in Israel would last. When the Lord spoke again to Elijah to present himself to King Ahab, the drought had already lasted 3 years. According to James, the exact period was 3.5 years, 133. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, observes, "This most dramatic story marks the turning point when the worship of the Lord is almost wiped out by the opposition. A single prophet challenges the whole state to return to God. The Lord had promised the people of Israel to give them grass for their cattle, under the condition that they would obey his command. We read, "So if you faithfully obey the commands I am giving you today, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, then I will send rain on your land in its season, both autumn and spring rains, so that you may gather in your grain, new wine, and oil. I will provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied." 134. The fact that the king of Israel had to go around the country looking for grass is the most ridiculous scene imaginable. It emphasized what happens when the living God, the creator of the universe, is being replaced by idols. Idols cannot create anything, not even grass. Elijah is told by the Lord to present himself to King Ahab. In order to obtain an audience, Elijah finds Obadiah, who was, what we may call, the king's prime minister. Although he was working for a king who was the greatest idolater the nation had ever had, Obadiah was himself a devout believer. We read that he had saved a group of 100 prophets of the Lord and had kept them out of the murderous clutches of Queen Jezebel. 133 James 5 verse 17, 134 Deuteronomy 11 verses 13 to 15. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Elijah finds Obadiah as the latter was in search of some grass to keep the king's animals alive. Obadiah's excuse for not announcing to Ahab that Elijah wants an audience sounds strange to us. He sees his life in danger because Elijah had been the main object of Jezebel's search. She and her husband considered him to be the sole person responsible for the drought. The pulpit commentary states, "This search for Elijah shows that Ahab regarded him as the author of the drought and did not recognize it as sent by God." Obadiah knew how intense had been the effort to locate Elijah, and he considered the fact that the prophet had never been found to be a divine miracle. He was afraid that another of those miracles could cost him his own life. He believed that, as he was on his way to find the king, the Lord would again miraculously hide his prophet, and that could cost him his head. God had never made Elijah invisible. He had only kept him hidden where Ahab. And Jezebel could not find him. It is only when Elijah swears with an oath that he will not disappear, but will meet the king, that Obadiah is willing to go and tell Ahab. Obadiah's hiding the 100 prophets had been much more dangerous than taking Elijah's message to the king. When Ahab sees Elijah, he calls him, "You troubler of Israel." The Hebrew word used is akar, which in some case can refer to destruction, as in the warning Joshua gave to the people of Israel about the spoils of Jericho at the invasion of the land. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. 135. Donald J. Wiseheart, in 1 and 2 Kings, comments on Ahab's accusation to Elijah that he is the troubler of Israel. Elijah was accused of being the troubler of Israel. Akar is taboo, cast out from social intercourse, because he was thought to have brought the drought, cf 17:1, and incurred the wrath of Baals, v 18, plural. This was a crime against the state worthy of death, like that of Achan, Josh 6:18, 7:25, and Jonathan in 1 Samuel 14 verses 24 to 29. Elijah's reply is that Israel's trouble is not the dearth of rain, but lack of faithfulness to God's covenant. At this point, it is Elijah who gives the commands to the king. As representative of the God under whose authority Ahab ruled the nation, the prophet orders the king to call a gathering of all the prophets of Baal and Asherah. The expression, "who eat at Jezebel's table," probably means that the 850 prophets were supported by the queen. Although she was the main one responsible for the country's idolatry, Ahab as the king bore the ultimate responsibility. The meeting was to take place on Mount Carmel. The Wycliffe Bible Commentary comments on the location chosen by Elijah for the confrontation, Mount Carmel, a mountain range of surpassing beauty, consisting of many peaks intersected by hundreds of larger and smaller ravines. It extends about 13 miles in a southeasterly direction, and at its western end drops off sharply into the Mediterranean, near Haifa. On one of the promontories, Elijah chose to stage the battle of the gods, between the gods of the heathen Phoenicians, represented by the Baalim, and the living God, Jehovah. It is 135 Josh 6:18. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Probable that the prophet selected this spot first for its natural geographic prominence, but also because it was debated ground between Israel and Phoenicia, and because the Canaanites believed Mount Carmel was the especial dwelling place of the gods. If this interpretation be correct, Elijah, like saints before and after him, dared to do battle with the spirit of wickedness in high places, even from the heights of Carmel itself. So confident was he of the outcome that he made it as difficult as possible for himself and for his cause to win, yet defied Baal to be the victor. We are not told how much time elapsed between Elijah's private meeting with King Ahab and the gathering on Mount Carmel. It must have taken several weeks to organize a large meeting like that, where not only the Baal priests, but most of the people of the kingdom gathered. Elijah took charge of the procedures, challenging the people to a decision. He received no answer to his question, "How long will you waver between two opinions?" If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him. The Hebrew text reads literally, "How long halt you between two opinions?" The Hebrew verb used is pakach, which literally means to hop or to limp. In some context, it can mean to pass over, as in, "The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt." 136, but it can also mean to be lame, as in the context of the verse. Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but as she hurried to leave, he fell and became crippled. His name was Mephibosheth. 137, the Wycliffe Bible Commentary comments on Elijah's challenge to the people. After gathering the people of Israel together, Elijah issued his challenge to them. How long halt you between two opinions? AV. Rather, how long go ye hobbling between them? Two forks of the road? Whichever translation one takes, the meaning is crystal clear. The issue was before them. A clear decision must be made. If Baal was to be God, Jehovah must be renounced. If Jehovah was to reign as God, Baal and all his worship must be forever abandoned. Many in Israel were probably tempted to compromise. Elijah, with whom no compromise was possible, saw clearly the radical character of the two issues and called for a definite decision. Such men always enjoy the blessings of God despite temporary unpopularity with the masses. Bible scholars have argued about the lack of response by the people. They remained mute. Barnes notes comments, "The people were mute. They could not but feel the logical force of Elijah's argument, but they were not prepared at once to act upon it. They wished to unite the worship of Yahweh with that of Baal to avoid breaking with the past and completely rejecting the old national worship, yet at the same time to have